Hello, welcome to Romero Threads on YouTube, where it's all about embroidery. In today's video, I want to talk about how I learned to do embroidery. Any rookie mistake that you've done, trust me, I've done every rookie mistakes you can ever think of. One thing about embroidery, we all start on the same level field. I know when I started at 0%. I did not know anything. So just like everybody else, we all start at ground zero. And in today's video, I want to give you a background how I started and how I learned embroidery. And I'm going to give you some examples, some good stuff that I did, some bad stuff that I should not have done. And the way I want to approach this training, it's kind of like me going back into time and giving myself this bit of information, because the learning curve in embroidery is super steep. But once you get above that learning curve, that's where the fun begins and that's where the profits are at. We have to go over that hump in order for everything to start making sense. We all start from ground zero, right? And somewhere there's an imaginary 100% expert level that nobody ever reaches. Don't ever think that anybody ever hits the expert 100%. You can't tell me nothing level. Sometimes I feel like I'm pretty high above the learning curve and very close to like expert level. And then there'll be certain projects, certain designs that throws a wrench in the mix, and all of a sudden I gotta go back to the fundamentals of embroidery. I'm always learning, I'm always experimenting. And you can see here I have two binders that I save a lot of notes. I probably have about 10 of these. All right, these are two that I have on hand right now with me. A lot of them are samples. A lot of them are digitizing files that I make a ton of notes. So let's go with 5 tips how I learned how to embroider. And these tips, they're not in any particular order. And remember, this is not like a law or a rule that you have to follow. This is just advice that I would have given myself. Let's start with tip number 1, and that is learn your machine. Now, you're going to hear that statement over and over. It's a common phrase you're always going to hear. Learn your machine. Learn your machine first. Learn your machine first. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take about 3, 4, 5 steps further than that. Okay. Not only learn your machine, but learn every little small detail piece of your machine. I have a printout and this could work for any machine. What I do, I print out the parts list, the blueprint, the machine, all the pieces of the machine. So you can see here, all right, I got a printout of all the pieces of the machine. And every machine, believe it or not, I have printouts of machines I don't even own. A lot of the technology, it's all similar. If you follow the thread path, you'll see that a lot of machines, they might not have the exact same piece, but everything is similar. The science of embroidery, it's all the same. For example, here, if we're talking about the needle bar, you'll see it'll have the serial number, parts name, and then here it has the location. For example, here you can see it says the needle bar, the press foot, the feltless pad, presser foot spring, cushion blocking, the front thread clamp module. Okay, these are all actual nomenclature, like the actual names of the pieces. All right, so the reason why I'm gonna say learn your machine to a component level, not just learn your machine like, hey, I have a machine, I know what it is. No, learn it on a component level. Know every little piece, especially every piece that your thread touches. You should know the name of everything that your thread touches. So when you're looking at your manual and your parts list, you should have a clear view of what's what. And once you start learning all the names of all the small little components, if something goes wrong, if there's something wrong and you suspect it's that, it's easier to search a specific component and kind of dig deep and when you're troubleshooting. And this is stuff that I learned because sometimes you call support and they'll say, hey, have you checked this? And you don't know what they're talking about. Let me check my references. And also I'll add this very basic piece of information, and that is just threading. We got to know how to thread our machine to the point where you could thread it with your eyes closed. You could just feel it and you could just thread it like nothing. Of course, you wouldn't want to do that, but I'm just kind of hypothetically speaking. A reason why this is my number 1, my first one, because anytime we have an error when something's not stitching out right, the first thing you have to do is follow that thread. You have to follow it from the beginning all the way to the end. That's always your number one thing you want to check. If something's not coming out right, you want to check your thread path. That's always the first thing you want to check. You get to the point where you know your machine's so good that if it starts making a certain sound, that's when it's time to start looking into your machine. I'll add this bit of information too with learning your machine. Start with small, easy, simple designs, especially your I test or your H test or your Fox test. Learn your tensions. Okay, that goes with learning your machine. So this number one, it's have a reference of all your major components. Learn your tension by doing the I test. That has to be automatic. You have to know how to do a tension test, an I test on day one or month one. I would not recommend you moving forward to the next level of embroidery before you understand how to do a tension test, especially an eye test. Trust me, I did not do that when I started. I did it all opposite. Just a quick little story, when I first bought my machine, I started spreading the word. I was telling everybody that I bought a brand new commercial embroidery machine, and I actually had jobs lined up before I even had my machine. And I was saying yes to everything. I didn't care. I was like, yeah, go ahead. I can do this. I can do that. And I took jobs way before. I didn't even know my machine. I didn't even know what's what. Me going back into time, the first thing I would have told myself, my rookie self, I would have been like, hey, hold your horses, learn your machine, learn your tensions. I definitely didn't do that, all right? And it cost me time, headache, money. Let's go ahead. Let's move with advice number 2 when learning how to embroider and how I learned how to embroider. The big advice I'll give you here on this one is choose a garment and be a master in that garment. I would recommend, me going back into time, this is what I would have told myself. Start with flat, basic garments. For example, a polo shirt. I would have started with polo shirts. I actually went the opposite route. I started with hats, which is probably considered one of the more complicated garments. When you're learning your garments, it's not only how to stitch on a garment, but learning all the features, all the different combinations you could have. So, for example, polo shirts, you have your jersey knits, your wovens, your PKs, your 100% cotton, you have your 100% poly, you have your 50-50, you have your 60-40. There's so many different routes that you could go with polo shirts. And the thing is, if you stop and you focus at one garment at a time, it's easier to absorb all that information. But sometimes we're here, we're there, we're everywhere, and we don't really fully understand garments all the way. We might have a kind of slight idea, or we might have the popular brands that we want. It's not only about choosing a specific type of brand and just sticking with that brand. You kind of want to know what's out there, because questions are going to start coming up. And then you have actual information, actual facts to tell them why you should or why you shouldn't use specific brands. In this phase, we are testing, experimenting, so you kind of get a sense of how certain designs react with different type of material, different type of backings. This is all testing phase. This is your beginning phase. You want to start absorbing all this information. Of course, I know a lot of us, right? We're jumping the gun, we're going in the deep end, and we haven't learned the fundamentals. So far in 1 and 2, we're in fundamental land. And once we learn one garment, so let's say we learn polo shirts, let's move on to the next one. Let's go to beanies. Let's go to backpacks. Let's go to jackets. Now, a lot of this is just in theory. Do you have to follow these steps? Of course not. But eventually it helps you out when you take 3 steps back and we go back to the fundamentals. That's one thing that really helped me. Even though I did skip a lot of steps and I was all over the place, anytime I did encounter some type of issue, I would always take 3 steps back and go to the fundamentals. Let's go with advice number 3. Choose your digitizer wisely. Your digitizer is literally like an employee. He's probably the most important employee. Even though you're sending it out, I still consider a digitizer part of the company. He is like the MVP employee. That design has to come in correctly, because you could have everything perfect. You could have the most expensive, the greatest embroidery machine ever made. You could have your hooping station, everything, all your stabilizers good to go. But if your digitizing is not on point, it's game over. You're gonna be fixing stuff and start tweaking stuff and where it's not necessary. And we didn't know that, right? You don't know what you don't know. That's the main thing when you're choosing a digitizer. You're like, all digitizers should know what they're doing. If they're offering a service, they should know what they're doing. But you'll be surprised how many digitizers are using that auto digitize. How many digitizers don't even have an embroidery machine to test out files. When you're looking for a digitizer, you got to take it like this is your first employee. You have to somehow dig through all the hundreds and hundreds of digitizers that are out there, and you got to find the best. The best way to go about it is actually talk to people, get recommendations. The last thing you want to do is send out a message talking about, I need a digitizer. Because you're going to get the worst of the worst digitizers out there. We probably went through like 12 digitizers by the time we landed with a digitizer. And let's go with number 4. Number 4 kind of connects with number 3, all right? And this one's always like a highly debatable one. And that is, should you learn digitizing? Does an embroiderer have to learn digitizing? And this is where it gets kind of debatable if you should learn how to digitize. And this is what I'm going to say on that. I think you should, at the very minimum, know how to digitize text. You should know how to put somebody's name and for that name to come out nice and clean. And to add with that, you should have at least some basic digitizing software. I always recommend have the software that your digitizer has. And if your digitizer has the very expensive level of software, just get the level that's below that software. For example, if your digitizer has the Wilcom, you could go ahead and get Hatch because now you can edit some files. A lot of times when you understand text, you slowly, gradually start understanding digitizing. The good thing about most common softwares is they already come with keyboard lettering. So you could just type in what you need, choose your font, choose your size, and then you should be able to stitch it out like that. I'm not saying you should be a full-out expert and you're designing everything, but at the very minimum, you should know what's happening behind the scenes when something's stitching out. Or if something doesn't come out correct, you should know where to focus on a specific design. Now, is it necessary to learn how to digitize? No, you can have a full out business without ever going into the digitizing. But that's only possible if your digitizer is throwing 3-pointers all day. If they're hitting nothing but swishes and your digitizing is always perfect, then you probably can get away without learning how to digitize. Sometimes what happens is customers are going to request customization. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to send 25 names to a digitizer. Number 5, this is a big one here. And this is one where I totally got it wrong. And that is, do not accept customers until you are ready to go. When you have steps 1, 2, 3, 4, now accept customers, all right? I kind of went backwards. I got customers first and then I went backwards. My biggest advice, learn your machine, master your garment, find your digitizer, learn the basics of digitizing. Now start accepting customers. Because believe it or not, I still get butterflies in my stomach when I'm ready to push start. It's like 1,000 things are running through my mind. And I just go back and ensure that everything was all done correctly in sequence. Bam, let's start this project. And I know sometimes what kind of forces us to move quick is we feel like we have to make money quick to pay for our machine, to pay for our expenses. And we need to start making money, of course, right? But sometimes if you move too fast, you're going to end up paying double, triple of what you're actually making. So instead of making money, you're going to end up losing money because now you got to cover for items that are messed up. Worst feeling ever. Worst feeling ever. All right. And I'm telling you because we were there. Our first couple months, it was just buying extra garments because stuff got trashed. It's the worst feeling when you're not prepared and you're doing customer jobs. All right. First of all, stress level all the way to the roof. Quality, right? Sinks. And it's the worst feeling ever. So I know that's not the most popular advice to give, but it's going to reduce stress level very significantly. And these are tips that I would definitely go back into time and tell myself, follow these steps to make your life easier, more efficient, and definitely less headaches. And I do want to ask for a big favor. If you can, in the comments, leave one piece of advice that you would give yourself your rookie year on what you should have done when you first started embroidery. All right, I want to thank you for stopping by, for hanging out. Leave all your questions, comments down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.